What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and of course, welcome back to the Mighty Max Drift Truck Rebuild Series. Now, I know it's been a really long time since I've posted, and I appreciate all of you that are still here to eventually, hopefully, see updates. I'm sorry it's been so long, but I want to explain why. So in the last 7 months, I think, 8 months, something like that, a lot's changed in my life. I got engaged to Sabrina, who's been in a couple videos. She's awesome, really happy to marry her soon. We bought a house together, and then we moved. So I had to move my whole shop. Oh, and I broke my wrist. So lots of stuff happened, lots of stuff made it harder to get this thing done and to stay kind of on task with, you know, where I was during the last video or last year, just overall, you know. So anyway, I had to move my shop, and I didn't get to move it all at once. I moved it in pieces because I still had to work, and the truck was in 1 million pieces at the time, so I ended up moving it, you know, kind of in boxes of parts, and we finally got it here, and we got the lift set up, and we're in a new shop, and it's awesome, and I'm really stoked for it. But because of that, a lot of my clips are kind of unexplained. I seemingly filmed half the shit that I was doing and then didn't edit it or didn't keep the clips. I don't really know. So some of this stuff, there's like 2 videos on it when there should have been 7 or whatever. So anytime that happens in this video, I'm gonna insert a small clip where I'm sitting right here like this and explain exactly what happened. I hope that's not super annoying. I think it still tells a story pretty well. And yeah, I'm just gonna do the best that I can. So straight out of the gate, I have all these new parts, and I never really talked about each one individually. I might have mounted the intercooler or the radiator, but I never give you a rundown of everything and where it's gonna go, but I did film it, so here's that.
In no particular order, we're just gonna run through this big parts pile here. We got a big Canyon 4-inch filter. We got a Vibrant 4-inch inlet Vangeon. This is gonna go on the turbo compressor side. We have a piece of 4-inch titanium left over from the exhaust tip. I knew that I would be able to purpose this as the intake pipe. Here is our 4-inch ferrule in titanium for the opposing side, so this will go here. The Vangeon will then connect it to the compressor housing. Got a bunch of other Tycon Vangeon ferrules to do the rest of the Vangeon assembly, which is all right here, all that good stuff. The intercooler, I actually ordered this intercooler from Speed Factory. It's very nice. I didn't want to have to take the time to build it, and I definitely cannot weld at this level. These guys are just absolutely insane with their consistency. They were so kind as to set this up with Vangeons already. So we got a 3-inch outlet, 2.5-inch inlet. This is a 3-inch thick core. I believe it's 12 inches tall by 24 wide or something. It's rated at 850. I'm never gonna push it that hard. This turbo won't even make that power, so we're good on the intercooler forever. This is a Magnus adapter for the 74mm Bosch throttle body. Allows us to not weld anything. You just put the O-rings inside here. They go on the throttle body itself. This slides over, and you're ready for Vangeons. Really trick part. Saves you a lot of fab time. The turbo outlet on the Garrett is 2 inches. The charge pipe is 2.5, so we have to transition somewhere to make that work. I'm either gonna do one of 2 things. Slide this up over the bottom of the turbo, and then we're at 2.5 already, and then put the Vangeon on the other side and call it good. Or we're gonna do a 2-inch one, and then we're gonna transition this way with a 2 to 2.5-inch cone with a Vangeon ferrule on there. Moving over to some of these pie cuts here, got a bunch of 2.5-inch pie cuts, so that I can get my charge pipe up and over the frame rails. We've got some 4-inch pie cuts, and that's gonna be for the intake pipe. We've got our brackets. These are going to mount our intercooler like this to our radiator. We're gonna sandwich it in the middle, just like my old setup where these get welded to the radiator tanks and then these get welded to the core. This is a rye wire tucked radiator for like a Civic, but it's the 12-inch XL version. I think it's 12 or 13 tall, so it's just a bigger core. Still uses 8-inch fans, kind of weird, but whatever. I also got this Chase Bays water neck. This is pretty cool. My old setup had like a welded custom water neck that came up here and whatever, it worked well, but this you can just buy off the shelf. It's ready to go. And that way, if I ever have like a front impact, I now have 2 items, this and that are relatively easy to replace versus a fully custom setup that I have to rebuild myself. I got my tile blow-off valve from the old setup with the weld-on flange already on there, just because I wanted to see what it looked like. These are our 3-inch ferrules. This is 2-inch for the hot side, just some spare straight 2-inch if I need it. And then we got a ton of random fittings and hose. This is all to plumb things like the turbo water inlet, turbo water outlet, oil feed line, oil return line, so on and so forth. This J Racing alternator bracket kit makes the whole thing possible, because without this, I wouldn't be able to move the alternator, and then the turbo would be out of luck. There'd be nowhere to put it. They both lived in the same place. So with this on the other side, we have plenty of space. That's great. Oh, and lastly, for all those that get mad about the broom holding the hood up, here are some carbon fiber hood dampers. I actually already had a set of these before, but I never put them on because I didn't have fenders, and you need the fenders installed before these can go on. But just know, eventually, the hood will be held up by something other than a broom handle. So with all these parts, I'm very stoked. I'm pretty motivated. It's a lot of shit, but you know, it's just part of how it goes. You got to get all this stuff piled up, and then you can work happily knowing that you're not going to fall short of having the right parts that you need to get the job done. So this is the Vibrant 4-inch Vangean adapter. Now it's got a lip on it because it's designed to run a coupler, but with this on there, it almost fits perfectly, except if you're like me, you think this is way too long. This distance where my thumb is, from here to here, looks ridiculous. So I'm gonna take my brand new, not inexpensive turbocharger cover off, and I'm gonna cut this lip off so that this can sit closer to the compressor cover. I'm gonna try my best to weld it only on the inside, so from the outside it still has this really nice machine look. Voila! And I didn't scratch this anywhere. That was already there. That wasn't me. That was already there. Thanks, Garrett, for that. But this, perfection. Sick. Nice and smooth edge. Now to clean off this, I'm gonna put it on the belt sander. We have a little bit of depth difference before we hit our surge ring, and that is the big thing. You do not want to hit that for obvious reasons. So I'm gonna lightly try to belt sand this smooth, just to get a nice clean look to it, even though you'll never see it. And that way we know it'll be nice and straight so that our ferrule sits down there very evenly. Came out pretty good. Cleaned out my cover. Here's our assembled 4-inch clamp with no O-rings for simplicity's sake. And there we have it. That's what I'm after. Let's go ahead and throw on our new Magnus throttle body flange, see what that looks like. You can see how this adapter works. There's an O-ring that sits internally, and this goes over the top, and it shares the same mounting holes. It's a little frustrating because you can't change this without pulling the throttle body off. But on the flip side, you only have one set of bolts. This will fit up like that, and we have a nice way to easily transition to route our charge pipes. So all those clips that you just watched were from before the tube front was started. However, in the last video, the front end is, mostly completed. So I couldn't actually build the charge pipes at that time when I was eyeing everything up, so I waited until it was all done. But then for some reason, I only filmed 3 clips. I don't know why, I don't know if I lost them, I have no idea. No explanation for that, I'm sorry, but here's those 3. Came up with this, which is basically a Vangean to a 2.5 to a 2 to a 2-inch 90. Plan is, come out like that, and we have a nice little routing to our intercooler here. So now we're gonna jump right into the clutch and transmission with zero explanation as to why. Oops. So getting this clutch figured out is not the easiest thing, but it's not the most difficult. This is an Action twin disc. It's the only company I even found that would build me a twin disc for the 6-bolt 4G, thankfully. And the price is pretty good too. So we got the same setup as before in a sense of, we have an R154 bell housing adapter here, but this is actually going to an AR5 in my situation, which is right there, conveniently holding the truck on the lift from being poorly distributed weight-wise. And because of that, there's a couple things that are like slightly different, but really it's mostly the same. I just have to spline it for 26 spline instead of, I think, 20 or whatever Mitsubishi is. This is GM spec 26 spline. We got the all-wheel drive flywheel to work with the starter. And then that's the adapter bell housing. Bill Hincher makes these housings. They're very nice. Pretty big fan of it, for the most part. It's the only option, so you kind of have to be. And then I just modified it and cut out the pivot ball mount here so that I can run this Ram throwout bearing. This is a hydraulic throwout bearing, and it's mounted to an Excessive Motorsports mount. This is made for the R154, and it's made for a 2J or a 1J, but it should work just fine. I measured the bearing face. All that stuff is the exact same as what I need. The only difference is the spacing has changed a little bit. I need to figure out the hose lengths on these fittings. Now, one of them is a bleeder, and obviously we can't get inside here to bleed this. So I'm gonna run a remote bleeder. So this is gonna come out, I'm gonna run a 90 off here through these old holes from my old T56 style bearing that I drilled those, not Bill. They don't look great, but they worked. And then another 90 here, which will then go to my clutch pedal. Now, I was gonna do a single continuous line from here all the way up through the floor to my OBP pedal box, but then every time I pull the motor, I've got to disconnect the line from inside because I will not be able to get to this line once it's all installed. But to remedy that, I'm gonna do a connection somewhere in here. I'm gonna jack the bell housing up on the trans jack and get it roughly where it's gonna sit, and then I'll build the line with a little bit of slack, and then we're gonna take some measurements with some wires, and should be good, hopefully, fingers crossed. Quick trip to the hose shop, everything is done and ready to rip. And then this is the feed line from the master cylinder, and then I made an interim piece that I can bolt up to the frame rail. This is the same type of connector you would see on like a brake line. And I have a little bracket in my pocket that I will hook on here and bolt to the floor, or the underside of the truck rather. And then if I ever go to pull the motor out, I can just disconnect it there rather than try to disconnect it inside the truck. While I was at it, I went ahead and picked up a brand new starter. The old starter got a lot of dirt on it from the rear main seal that was bad, so I'm glad I got that sorted out. So when I built this thing, I overbuilt it for certain. Let's see if I can get this thing to focus the lighting. You can see I have this big hoop in here. This is an 1 5/8 bar. When I rebuilt this truck, I rebuilt the entire floor. You can see all the bracing and stuff like that. And I think this was very much overkill. This is 16 gauge sheet, it's bent, it's all welded up, it's not even stitched, the whole thing is welded, so it didn't need to be so insane. Well, this tunnel is fucking huge. You can see it's really big, but it doesn't matter because the trans hits this thing. I'm gonna try to get in there with the Sawzall and just get this fucker out of the way, and life will be a lot better. And she's out. So look how much room this opened up. I have a ton of space now. It should make my life so much smoother when I put this trans in. Fast forward to the next day, it was a game changer to have that tube out of the way. Stoked on that. Motor's in, it's bolted in, trans mount is tight, and I'm just going through the paces of assembling everything back together. So I welded this off camera. This is my water feed line for the turbo, and it's gonna come out and go down to this side of the turbo, and then it's gonna come out of the turbo and go to the other side underneath the engine into this fitting right here on this little thermostat housing that I built. Built this a long time ago and it works pretty well. There's a couple of challenges with the 4G63 and a rear wheel drive configuration, especially if you want to run heat and stuff like that. The biggest thing to tackle once I get the manifold and turbo kit installed is the water pump, which I also worked on that. So the old pump looks like this, except it used to have this old little thing coming off it, whatever. And the new pump, the way I ended up welding it up is this fitting here. So I capped the end of it, I cut it down, and I welded a -16 right there on the tube. So that should work pretty well, and it's all taped up and prepped so that I can grind it down, because this is a 4G64 pump and you have to clearance it to work with the 4G63 timing components. It's not a big deal, it looks like this, it's kind of ugly, but the timing cover goes on and you can't see it anyway. So that's done as well. All this stuff is kind of boring, I just glossed over filming it. I feel like it wasn't worth the added waste of time and the space on the memory card. So that explains that. I'm gonna clearance that, get that on, then I can time the motor, and I can put the turbo kit on and run the feed line down.
All right, so somewhere in between eyeballing my charge pipes and putting the engine and trans and everything back in the truck, I dropped off the exhaust manifold, the downpipe, and a variety of other parts to get ceramic coated in glacier black. It came out great, it looks awesome, and I didn't want to just go from a silver manifold to a black manifold without explaining it, so here's that clip now.
Look at how awesome all this stuff came out. I got a little excited and I put the fittings on, and I don't know if I talked about this, but this is it's real carbon. I had it made by Send Cut Send. I just basically traced out the old design or dimensioned it rather. And the valve cover is powder coated. This is gloss black. It was a last minute change to go from Cerakote to powder coat. I'm really happy that I did, because I was just worried it was gonna look too flat or too matte finish. You know, how Cerakote does, like this. But while we're talking about this, look how badass this thing looks. Nothing has changed with it except that it is now Cerakoted and it looks so good. And then I did the exhaust housing and then my downpipe. Downpipe came out awesome. Very happy with that as well. No complaints anywhere, to be honest. Everything just looks so damn good. Manifold and turbo are tight, and I got 2 lines left to build before I can move on to the downpipe and the water pump and all that. So this is the feed line here. I showed you that before. That is gonna come off with a 90-degree fitting here, run under the turbo, and then feed this side with a 120, which keeps it relatively tight to everything. And then I'm gonna come out of it with a 120 and go underneath the motor, across the subframe into that aluminum weld bung fitting I showed you before. Then I gotta do the return line on the turbo, which now I finally have the oil pan on with the correct drain, so I can get that knocked out. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this line, get it built, and then we can install that and move forward. All right, so I got my line cut, and before I put the fitting on the other side, I'm gonna go ahead and put this on it. This is fiberglass heat sleeve. It fits really tight. It's maybe one size too small, but it looks pretty good when it's on, and it'll just help avoid, you know, burning the line up. All thrown together, looks like this. Pretty clean. Moving on to the oil drain. You can see it routes just right down from here. Pretty straightforward. I got a 45 on there. And then we got our new OEM type oil pan on here with the OEM return, which is really nice. Got the oil line put together, ready to throw it on. Pretty happy with that. Now this is just a ground wire for the block, which goes to the frame right here. So I'm not gonna hook that up right now. And I might actually take this off or leave it loose, so that I can figure out how the hell we're gonna check the oil level on this motor. Because look at the dipstick spot where that paper towel is, and look where the turbo is. It's not looking good, guys. It is not looking very good. So here's the old dipstick that used to be on this thing, and I bent it quite a bit because the manifold was obviously custom or whatever, so I needed to have room for this. Then I also put a -6AN vent on this dipstick with 0 zero screen or restriction or anything like that. And what was happening is I was actually filling up the oil catch cans way too fast, and it was crazy. Like a couple pulls and they'd fill. Got rid of this, plugged it, everything's fine. So that is never coming back. Now I bought a brand new dipstick, and that way, you know, I could just install it and be good to go and never have to worry about that again. Unfortunately, I did not realize that this would not work at all due to the manifold placement. Just overlooked it. I don't know how it happened, but you know, it did. So with that being said, I have a test mule that I can modify and cut up and potentially just use this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this thing right down here where it will just barely fit in the block below the hot side. This is a tough one to see, but I want to try to show you what I'm talking about. So you can see just above this ground here, right up there, is the little portion of dipstick, a little baby stub. Now if I put the stub back in, you'll notice it's very close to the top of that exhaust housing. So I came up with this. This is a combination of the same dipstick, but I cut it in half, and then I flipped it over and welded it together. It's just tacked for right now. I don't have the right size filler to actually weld it successfully, but it does slide right in. So let me show you that, and then I'll show you the changes I gotta continue to make, because with two steep bends like this, it's pretty hard to slide the dipstick through the tube. Fully seated, this is where we're at right now. So obviously that looks insane. It does mean that we have a possible, you know, option, so that's good, but it's obviously not gonna stay like that. So what I would like to do is cut it down right there, and that way we don't have, I don't know, we don't have any of it real visible, and then we'll just have the little head of the dipstick, and I just grab it and pull it out. Cut the tube down, and you can see it's just barely squeaking past the turbo. I think that'll look really clean when you just see this small little billet piece sticking out from the top. And then I'm gonna take the OEM piece that I had cut off right here, and I'll figure out a way to mount this and, you know, make it pretty solid, pretty usable. Honestly, this is so much easier than I expected. I don't really foresee anything going wrong here, so once again, fingers crossed. I got it tied together, and then I set it in place, and I trimmed a little tab to make it work, so you get a pretty good idea of how it's gonna work out. Now I had to pull all the turbo stuff off just to be able to get in here. And then the head of this bolt is so large that you can't actually put this in with the turbo in place. And I'm willing to bet the compressor cover won't fit either, so I gotta change the head of this, but you can tell it's obviously like a massive bolt head. So I put a small spacer behind here to get this plate off the block a little bit. There's a little bit of an air gap. We're pretty close to the hot side, which won't be a problem, and it gives me just enough room to run my coolant outlet line from the side of the CHRA here. Anyone who is wondering how this is going to work, I marked the bottom of the dipstick here. So on my really messy table, you can see I have a Sharpie line. So this is where the factory dipstick came past the factory dipstick tube or housing. So all I need to do is cut this down accordingly to make sure I still have this much sticking out, and then I'll make a little hole like that. I can run my little pinch collar through on my frontline fab handle here, and then we're all good to go.
And that is going to do it for today's video, guys. Right after that last clip was filmed, I decided to pile everything in boxes and move to the shop that we're in right now. So again, I apologize for all that, and I apologize for not showing you the finished dipstick. It's kind of weird to just stop it right in between. But it was even weirder for me because then I got onto it like 2 months after living here, and I had no clue where I had left off. And that brings us to the next video. So thank you as always for watching. Peace out.